So thank you all for joining. My name is Andra Savanen. I'm the Assistant Dean of Admissions and Recruitment at the Faculty of Law at McGill University. I'm also a graduate of the program. I graduated in 2014 from the BCL LLB program, as it then was known. So thank you for being with us this evening virtually. Normally we would like to host this in person, but unfortunately due to the current circumstances with COVID, we are doing this virtually. But I'm hoping that it's still going to be a useful event for everyone who has joined tonight. I'd like to just start quickly by acknowledging that McGill University and all of Montreal, so I'm located in Montreal still, is located on Indigenous lands in Jojaga, which is the Mohawk word for Montreal, originally founded by the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation. This land is unceded, which means that it was colonized without a treaty, and as the descendant of settlers to this land, acknowledging as much as my way of promoting learning and generating allyship within our community. Donc, comme vous le savez déjà probablement, le programme de droit à McGill est fièrement bilingue et donc ma présentation va se faire et en français et en anglais. Je sais que le mot repostulant est un mot inventé, mais on va l'utiliser ce soir pour les fins de la présentation. As I mentioned, the presentation will be done bilingually. You can ask your questions in both French and English. First of all, I just want to thank you all for coming. I mean, this is a presentation for folks who have not been offered admission to the program, so I think it takes a bit of courage to join this kind of workshop. The reason why we started giving this session a couple of years ago, and we found that it's worked really well, is through the years we've held many meetings with individual candidates. We've given comments, and we always end up going over the same points over and over. So we felt like it was better for us to be more transparent and efficient if we just shared with everyone. And so we've been doing this workshop for a few years now. So I hope it is useful to you. So just to go over the agenda quickly, I'll start by saying what won't be covered. So this won't be a workshop where I'm going to talk about general admissions requirements or our process. You're going to need to listen to our general admissions information session, which was given and recorded last week and which will be shared on our website soon. So please don't ask any questions about sort of general admissions requirements because we will not be answering them during this session. But you're more than welcome to get in touch with our admissions office or check out our website for more information. Donc, la session de ce soir sera enregistrée, mais vos web caméras et vos microphones sont désactivés de façon automatique, donc vous resterez anonyme. Veuillez, s'il vous plaît, nous poser vos questions via la fonction Q&A dans l'outil WebEx. Vous pouvez les poser à n'importe quel moment durant la séance, mais nous ne répondrons pas avant la fin de la session pendant la période de questions. C'est possible que ma collègue Kelly Hanley, qui est avec nous ce soir, va partager avec vous des liens dans la section Q&A. Mais nous allons passer au travers toutes vos questions en plus de détails vers la fin de la séance seulement. So please feel free to ask your questions at any time during the session this evening. But just note that we're not going to be answering them throughout the session. We're gonna really cover them all at the end. And so asking them more than once in the Q&A isn't going to get them answered any sooner. Donc, la présentation ce soir, il y a plusieurs parties. Donc, la première partie, c'est vraiment les points 1 et 2 sur l'ordre du jour. C'est de vraiment vous aider à comprendre le contexte de notre processus. Ensuite, la deuxième partie, c'est sous les points 3 et 4 sur la diapo. C'est vraiment de comprendre le passé, analyser le refus que vous avez reçu. Et comprendre votre application et les éléments de votre application. Et ensuite, la troisième partie, sous les points 5, 6 et 7, c'est pour vous préparer pour l'avenir, looking forward. Points 1 to 6 should take about an hour, and then we are going to be joined by one of our student ambassadors who's going to speak a little bit about her experience as a re-applicant, and then we will go to the Q&A. So the reality of admission at McGill Law. And I think probably the image that we have up on the slide represents maybe how all of you have felt at one point. Of course, confused, sad, disappointed about your refusal, maybe angry at the admissions office. At all times, I would say that we really do appreciate your politeness in dealing with our office, because it's hard for us too also to refuse you. We have a number of, hundreds of excellent candidates every year, and I'm going to be sort of emphasizing that over and over. And so it is hard for us to say no to so many folks. Donc, la réalité est qu'il n'y a simplement pas assez de place pour plus que 185 élèves dans notre salle de tribunal école, qui est notre salle plus grande à la faculté de droit. Donc, la grande majorité des dossiers sont refusés parce que, malheureusement, nous n'avons pas assez de place. Et il y a beaucoup d'excellents dossiers qui sont refusés. Donc, vous n'êtes pas seul, but there are many excellent success stories from reapplicants as well. So let's put some context to this, this sad reality about the number of refused candidates every year. We get over 1,000 applicants every year. Due to lack of space, we have to refuse many. The reality on the ground is that there's an 8-to-1 ratio of applicants to class size. So the vast majority of folks are not going to be getting an offer of admission. It is really important for me to note, though, that there are very, very few files in the pool that are not competitive at all. A lot of our files that we receive are from smart, hardworking students who are really doing everything well. And so I'll talk a little bit more about, why you might have been refused, considering that a lot of you are truly great applicants for sure. So there are obviously different categories of applicants. There are those who of reapplicants. There are those who might have been refused as CEGEP students. There are those that might have been refused as university students. Those refused as mature students or advanced standing or transfer. Those refused after being put on the wait list. This could apply to any number of the categories that I just mentioned. So reapplicant can mean a lot of things. It can be someone who's reapplying 3 years later after initially applying from CEGEP and getting refused, someone who's reapplying after 1 year at university, someone who is reapplying with a graduate level degree, and someone who has come very close on the wait list. Donc, pour parler un peu des statistiques, so in the 2019-2020 cohort, we had 1,423 applications. We made 234 offers. There were 182 students who started in our first year cohort. Of all of the applications we received, 445 were CEGEP applicants, and amongst the CEGEP pool, 37 offers of admission were made. Mais comme j'ai dit sur la diapo, c'était vraiment une année exceptionnelle. Normally, we would make closer to 265 offers in a usual year. And so many more people were refused this past year than in a normal year. And I'm not sure exactly why more people ended up accepting their offers earlier in the cycle. I suspect that it might have had something to do with the pandemic and maybe folks just looking for some certainty in an uncertain time. But just keep these numbers in mind. Normally, we would be making closer to 260 offers. Donc, dans la cohorte de première année, dans tous les demandes d'admission qu'on a reçues, 10,7% de personnes candidates étaient des personnes repostulantes. On a fait la même proportion d'offres aux personnes candidates qui sont des repostulantes, et 13,2% de la cohorte de première année sont des repostulants, repostulantes. So I talked a little bit in the first section about sort of the context and the reality of admission to McGill Law to sort of set the stage as to why so many people end up being refused and the proportion of individuals who make up our reapplicant pool. Now I'm going to start the second part, the second sort of overarching part of the workshop this evening. So looking backwards, sort of understanding the past, understanding the why of the refusal that you received, analyzing the refusal, and being a little bit self-aware, which can be slightly painful for some people. I want to start this section by being totally transparent. So some of this information is maybe going to be difficult for you to hear, for you to take, but I'm sharing it so that you know. I feel like having more information is better because it helps you understand. And it's important for you to know how our decisions are made and to know what you're up against in terms of admission, because it is a very competitive program. This workshop is really meant to be helpful by giving you fact-based and transparent information, but it might not always be fun to hear. So if you're here joining or if you're listening to this at a later date, I trust that you're going to be listening with a positive attitude. So this is where the workshop of this workshop really takes its meaning. We're going to go through everything together, but you need to be attentive and critical of your own path to really benefit from the workshop. So content warning completed. I'm going to start now to give you a little bit of information about our holistic approach to evaluation of files in our admissions process, as well as how decisions are made. So I mentioned earlier many times that there is a huge imbalance between the number of spots we have available for students and the number of people who apply. The sheer competitiveness of our program dictates a very long, arduous comparative exercise between candidacies. And this, of course, leads to refusing many files with positive elements. Ultimately, though, you were refused because there were stronger files ahead of you for the number of spots we have in the pool. So we have a holistic admissions process at the Faculty of Law at McGill. Most I would say law faculties across Canada have a similar kind of holistic process. But basically what that means is that we're taking into account every element of your file. And that also means that we're providing a bit of context for your grades as well. So we're looking at really all the elements of your file all together. So the holistic admissions process basically means that someone may be considered for admission even though they may have been refused on one ground alone without the holistic approach. So for example, someone who may not be as competitive academically might not meet a threshold and might just be filtered out. But with our holistic admissions approach, this gives the committee the freedom to play around with the files and possibly give a chance to a file that has interesting features and strong potential to contribute, but has weaknesses as well. So the rest of the file can pull up the entire file, even if one element is not completely competitive on its own, including grades, although in most cases, the grades are never completely weak throughout an application. The holistic approach doesn't mean that we favor candidates with lower academic records over stronger ones. This might seem obvious, but I do feel like it's worth noting that the program and our sort of expectations are still quite high with regard to academic performance, even though other elements can pull your file up if maybe grades aren't the strongest part of your file. Sometimes I've heard people are under the impression that because McGill considers more than grades, that they have a higher chance of being admitted at McGill because of other strengths than at other schools. I would say that this is true in some cases, less true in other cases. We do look at everything, of course, but the potential for academic success remains a really important part of our approach to admissions. We make a huge effort to put quantitatively less stellar grades in their proper context for candidates who may have faced barriers to higher education. So speaking from experience, I come from a low-income family where neither of my parents went to university. I had to support myself financially throughout my university career, which meant working part-time, which meant less time for extracurriculars or focusing on my grades by themselves. And so I recognize that many of our applicants are supporting themselves both financially and educationally and may not necessarily be able to put as much attention into their grades as folks coming in who have had all that support. So the elements that are reviewed during the holistic admissions process are your academic record, so all of your grades on your transcript, your LSAT score if you have written the LSAT, your CV, your personal statement, your reference letters, as well as any extenuating circumstances and or an Indigenous supporting document if you have applied as an Indigenous person. Evidence of linguistic abilities is another element that we consider as well. So we look at all of these elements together and we ensure that there's the potential for academic success. So we really don't want to admit anyone to McGill Law who is going to come here and really struggle or fail. Law school is hard enough as it is. So we want to make sure that you're going to come in and be able to succeed. We're going to look at your languages, and then we're going to assess your overall potential for contribution to our community. So we don't put any specific weight on your grades or any other element of your application. There are no cutoffs or thresholds with grades or LSAT scores. It really is more fluid. In practice, in my experience with the committee, the holistic approach can really allow us to overlook one or two elements that are slightly weaker relative to the rest of the file. But I do have to say and be honest and open that if you have more than two elements of your file that are weaker, you're much more unlikely to be admitted. So the first thing that we do, sort of to take a step back before the overall holistic approach to reviewing your file, is a first triage on linguistic abilities. So if you know a little bit about our program, you should know because if you're here as a reapplicant, that we do have a passive bilingualism requirement. So if a file clearly doesn't have French and English, and in most cases it is mostly French than English that people are lacking, the file will be refused, whether or not it might have been strong or weak. If we see no evidence of French, for example, the file won't go any further in the review process. So it's possible that someone, even with a 175 LSAT and a 98 GPA, will be refused purely on the basis of lacking bilingualism, because that passive bilingualism in French and English is so critical for our program. So that sort of covers the holistic approach of evaluation that we have. The second part of this slide, I want to talk a little bit about how decisions are made at the Faculty of Law about whether or not we're going to offer you admission to the program. So decisions are made with one or more committee members doing a holistic evaluation, the evaluation that I just spoke about. There's sort of two levels of a comparative exercise that happens. First, there's a review that happens at the committee level. So each committee member will look at a batch of files at a time and will sort of compare those files to each other and make a recommendation. And then the files will come to the Assistant Dean of Admissions, myself, as the final reader. I will then look at their comments and look at those files in comparison to the whole pool, which I will have seen, and I will be the decider on behalf of the entire admissions committee. So really the final decision about whether or not to offer you admission is made comparing your file up against the pool overall. So when you're refused, it can mean very rarely that you were really just not competitive across the board. And more often than not, although you had a number of strong elements, there were more candidates who were just overall stronger for the number of spots available in the first year class. So now to move on and give you a little bit more detail about, reading your refusal letter. And I know sometimes it's hard to go back and look at those again, but if you really want to understand why you were refused, I would recommend this. So go back to the refusal letter that you received on Minerva, and you will see that it has one of these reasons outlined in it in some way. So because of the sheer volume of applications, I talked about this a little bit before, we don't provide detailed feedback to refused candidates. We're not going to have a one-on-one meeting with you, with a member of the admissions office, to go through piece by piece what elements of your file the admissions committee found to be favorable, which elements they found to be less strong. The committee makes an effort to give you an accurate and somewhat specific reason in your letter. So the sentences inserted will really depend on the predominant reasons why you were refused. So your letter can hint to your weaknesses or highlight some of your strengths as well. So it's really important to go back and read that closely. So the first postscript that you might have received in your letter of refusal was that you had positive elements in your file, but overall it was just not competitive. So this is the most commonly used reason that we give to applicants. And really what it's saying is that there were a mix of weaknesses and possibly strengths, but there wasn't one particular element that was weak. There were just several non-competitive elements, and that you may have come close on several, but overall it just didn't come together as competitive compared to the pool. So think back to your file and assess your weaknesses and strengths. It's really important that you do that. So through this workshop, we're going to keep feeding you information to paint that picture for yourself. So for example, if you applied and you had really strong grades and you still got refused, then this message is indicating to you that there are issues with your CV, with your personal statement, or with your reference letters. The next postscript that you might find in your letter is that the academic portion of your file was not competitive. So this is used for out of the ballpark cases of academic non-competitiveness. Unfortunately, you have your university transcripts forever. So unless you have, a stellar LSAT score or a new degree or extenuating circumstances that maybe we didn't know about and that you didn't tell us about, you are unlikely to be admitted if you reapply. I'm going to talk a little bit about this later, but you can't expect the pool of applicants applying to McGill Law to get any less strong academically. So the onus really does fall on you to try and overcome that weakness. The third postscript that you might find in your letter is that you had insufficient French, and I'm focusing in on the French because we very rarely see students applying who have insufficient English. This is the reason that we're going to give you when the insufficiency of your French is really glaring. The rest of your file may have been great or not. If your French was improved, it's possible that there could be a chance of considering admission, but it could also have been uncompetitive on other grounds. But when you have absolutely no French, or when there's just no evidence of French in your file, this is the reason that we're going to be giving you. The next set of postscript, or the next postscript that you would see is that your undergraduate degree is not going to be completed by the time you start your studies at McGill. So yes, the minimum for eligibility to apply to McGill Law is 60 credits, but given the pool and our preference for a completed degree, not having a completed undergraduate degree by the time you start your studies with us just means that you're not going to be competitive compared to the pool. Your file might have been very promising or not. There is a sort of a nuance to this postscript in that all of those who receive it are encouraged to reapply in a later cycle after they have finished their undergraduate degree. For us, there really needs to be extremely compelling reasons to admit someone who is not going to have that completed undergraduate degree coming into the program if they're applying in that category. I think, knowing what I know about the history of this position, I think my predecessors may have admitted folks without an undergraduate degree twice in the last 15 to 20 years. So, and the reasons for admitting those people were very, very compelling. So it's very unlikely that you would be admitted if you didn't have an undergraduate, and you should really consider completing that undergraduate degree before thinking of reapplying again. The next reason that might appear in your letter is that you were refused post-interview. This is very rarely used. It's more of a statement of fact. The interview may have been determinative, but may have not. This is not usually used for CEGEP applicants because they're all encouraged to apply after the undergraduate degree. But like I said, it could just mean that, the interview wasn't necessarily determinative. It was just that you got refused after you came to interview. And oftentimes we will include a postscript that you are encouraged to reapply. So this is a good sign. It means that you had many good elements in your file. And it was just borderline, but not quite waitlist potential compared to the pool. It may also be that it's an indication that there's something that needs to be fixed in your file, for example, an LSAT score or improving your French, for example. Note that for waitlisted applicants whose letters don't offer specific reasons other than space for having been refused, they should always consider themselves encouraged to reapply because folks who are waitlisted really are admissible. There just isn't space in the class at that particular moment. So now to talk a little bit about kind of grasping your strengths and weaknesses, donc de saisir vos forces et vos faiblesses. So more stats. What I'm going to say first is you should really focus on all elements of your file, but academics is something that you want to be paying attention to. So you'll see here on the slide that the average CGPA for university candidates is 85%. The average LSAT score for those who take it, and between 35 and 39% of our admitted students will have written the LSAT in a given year. So the average LSAT of those students is 161, and then the average R score is 34.11 for CEGEP candidates. I would add, though, that in our admitted candidates, the range of the GPA goes from around 73 to 95, and the R score from 30.9 to 37.7, and LSATs go as far down as 150. But the reality is that the 25th percentile of admits is already at 82%, or a 33.14 R score and a 159 LSAT. So there would only be like a quarter of the class who is getting less than an 82% or a 33.14 R score or a 159 LSAT. So this should give a sense of the exceptions that we can make in the context of academic competitiveness when we're looking at those other elements of your application. Usually there are less than 10 folks who are admitted in any cycle who have a GPA of less than 78%. In 2020, again, a very exceptional year, there were only 6 students who were admitted with a GPA of less than 78%, 9 who had a GPA of less than 80% overall. But for reference and to kind of put things in context, there were also 88 admitted students with an average of over 86%. So the academic strength of the pool and of the admitted candidates is quite high. Having not done so well in CEGEP, don't worry too much about your CEGEP grades because we're not going to put as much weight on your CEGEP grades. So if you have the type of grades that you see here on the slide, it might be useful to know what we look at. So in terms of determining your academic performance, we're going to look at the level and progression of your curriculum, the rigor of the program, and just a little side note, there is no preferred degree that leads to a law degree. So we just want to see that you've done something, and I mean, any university degree is going to be a challenging degree, but that is something that we look at. And very importantly, the class averages in the classes and the reoccurrence of easy courses, or what I call bird courses. And a little side note here, as a McGill grad, I did my Bachelor of Arts at McGill. I know what the bird classes at McGill are, so just be aware of that. So yeah, that's what I would say about your grades. Aussi, c'est super important, mais si vous avez d'excellentes notes et vous avez tout de même été refusé, c'est super important que vous travaillez sur plusieurs éléments de votre dossier. C'est un peu plus facile pour vous car ceci n'est pas nécessairement fixé dans le passé comme des notes d'université. Donc, je vais passer au travers les autres éléments du dossier de demande d'admission. En premier, c'est le CV, le résumé. Donc, c'est super important que dans votre CV, vous avez de la preuve d'un engagement qui est peut-être un peu plus focusé sur du leadership au lieu d'un engagement plus passif. On veut voir une profondeur de l'implication. C'est mieux de voir une ou deux activités dans lesquelles vous avez été super impliqué au lieu de 8 où c'était vraiment juste une implication de très, très, très haut niveau. Il y a plusieurs combinaisons qui peuvent être gagnantes pour vous, comme par exemple du travail, du bénévolat, des sports, de la musique, mais toujours, on veut voir une profondeur. Des résumés, des CV moins compétitifs pour nous sont celles qui contient rien sauf les études avec des notes moyennes et des emplois d'été. On veut voir que vous êtes engagé, que vous êtes impliqué dans des activités. I would say quality is more important than quantity for us. So really do make sure that you're getting involved in activities where you can really kind of get more involved and show that you're a leader and that you're able to work with others. Pour ce qui est de la lettre de présentation personnelle, je ne peux pas mettre trop d'emphase sur ça, mais relire-la plusieurs fois, c'est super important. Demandez à un ami, demandez à vos parents, à un de vos références de la lire. C'est très, très, très important que ça répond aux 3 questions, les 3 questions qu'on pose dans la lettre de présentation personnelle. Donc, pourquoi le droit? Pourquoi le droit à McGill? Pourquoi vous, comme personne candidate? Plusieurs fois, je vois que ça couvre seulement le pourquoi le droit et il n'y a pas assez de temps et de détails sur pourquoi le droit à McGill ou pourquoi vous comme personne candidate. La lettre de présentation personnelle, ça aide vraiment le comité des admissions à comprendre les facteurs qui vous incitent à poursuivre une formation juridique, les raisons qui motivent vos désirs pour les études en droit, ainsi que l'intérêt que vous portez à notre programme spécifiquement. Ça permet aussi aux membres du comité d'évaluer votre qualité d'écriture, super important dans les études en droit, ainsi que votre capacité à vous exprimer clairement à l'écrit, que ce soit en anglais ou en français, n'importe quelle langue sont acceptables pour nous. Et c'est aussi à travers cet essai que nous cherchons à évaluer votre niveau de maturité et de jugement aussi. Donc, passez beaucoup de temps sur votre lettre de présentation personnelle. C'est l'élément, je pense, un des plus importants de votre demande d'admission en droit. En termes des recommandations, assurez-vous, c'est peut-être très simple, mais assurez-vous qu'elles soient pratiquement toujours positives. S'il y a des éléments qui se retrouvent dans des lettres de recommandation, s'il y a des éléments négatifs, comme par exemple que vous avez des problèmes avec le respect des dates limites, des échéanciers, des problèmes de communication, c'est très grave pour nous parce qu'on va nous demander pourquoi cette personne a décidé d'inclure cette lettre de recommandation dans leur demande. Même si les recommandations sont très positives, elles peuvent être moins compétitives si elles semblent être coupées-collées, non spécifiques ou si elles parlent uniquement de vos qualités personnelles. Donc, on cherche vraiment une explication de plusieurs de vos qualités, pas seulement personnelles, mais aussi au niveau académique aussi. Par exemple, si votre lettre dit que vous êtes respectueuse, que vous avez posé des bonnes questions dans un cours, que vous êtes impliqué à l'extérieur de l'école. Oui, ce sont des commentaires très positifs, mais plutôt hors sujet pour nous. On cherche vraiment des commentaires sur la qualité des la qualité des interventions que vous avez faites, la qualité de votre recherche, de la rédaction, de votre intelligence, de votre curiosité académique aussi. Si la lettre de référence ne mentionne pas ces choses, ça peut être positif, mais pas nécessairement concurrentiel, parce que ce n'est pas très distinctif comparé à autres personnes candidates qui ont postulé chez nous. En termes des aptitudes linguistiques, c'est pas vraiment un élément concurrentiel dans le même sens que les aptitudes académiques. Donc, quelqu'un qui est complètement bilingue n'est pas plus compétitif que d'avoir des aptitudes linguistiques de base pour notre programme. Encore une fois, c'est une politique de bilinguisme passif. Donc, dans tous les cas, on veut juste s'assurer que vous avez le niveau qu'on a besoin et donc avoir un bilinguisme complet, c'est pas nécessairement plus concurrentiel que les autres. En termes des circonstances atténuantes, ceci est important dans l'évaluation du dossier scolaire et aussi l'évaluation de votre résumé et les activités dans lesquelles vous avez été impliqué. Les circonstances atténuantes peuvent avoir un moindre impact si elles ne sont pas supportées par des preuves externes, le cas échéant, mais elles sont toujours prises en considération même si vous n'avez pas soumis des preuves externes aussi, comme par exemple une lettre d'un médecin. Le comité donne beaucoup le bénéfice du doute dans les cas des circonstances atténuantes. Donc, s'il y avait quelque chose qui s'est passé, mais vous n'avez pas parlé dans votre demande, les circonstances atténuantes peuvent vraiment répondre aux questions si vous les expliquez de bonne façon. So as a whole, ask yourself, when you're looking at all of the different elements of your file, are there elements that are going to lead to questions that are being asked by the committee? Have I anticipated those questions? Are there gaps to be filled? We don't know you personally, and most applicants are not interviewed. And so you want to really use the various elements of your application to tell us everything about yourself that you can. Think about your law school application a bit like a jigsaw puzzle, and imagine us as the puzzle builders, but we don't have a picture of what the final image is supposed to look like. So you want to make sure that you fill all the gaps as much as you can so that we're not left with questions about who you are, why you want to come to law school, why maybe you didn't do so well in a class, or why you weren't as involved in a certain activity. Pour passer maintenant aux pièges qui affligent les repostulants, repostulantes. So the main reason or the main things that re-applicants fail to do properly when they reapply. The first thing here would be to reapply without changing anything. So this is a huge issue. If you don't change anything and you just reapply with the same documents, the same personal statement, the same CV, basically nothing has changed, maybe you have some new grades, you're very, very likely going to be refused again, unless you are on the wait list until the very end. And even then, reapplying is not just waiting for your luck to turn or waiting for the pool to become less competitive. It's not going to, and if it does, then I'm not doing my job, my recruitment job, well enough. But really, you want to make sure that you're taking the time to kind of look back at your file and think about changing something significantly if you're able to. Another issue that we see often is that folks who improve on their strengths instead of addressing the weaknesses in their application. Again, if you're only focusing on your strengths without, trying to kind of fix some of your weaknesses, you're very likely to be refused again. These weaknesses need to be addressed and redressed if possible. The committee won't get past a major weakness. That's the simple fact. Obviously, we all have a natural tendency to do what we're good at, but you do need to work on those weaknesses, even if it's a more painful process. Again, you can't wait for the pool to become more, or you can't wait for the pool to become less competitive, excuse me. You really do have to face the weaknesses head on. En termes des aptitudes linguistiques, c'est pas facile, c'est clair, de changer les aptitudes linguistiques. So learning another language obviously is hard work, but if you were refused because of lack of French specifically, and you don't make any effort to improve on that point, you are really doing yourself a disservice because, it is a basic admissions requirement, and we're not gonna admit anyone into the program who doesn't have the requisite level of French, because you're not going to be able to succeed in the program. Um, le prochain point, c'est sur la manque d'adaptabilité. Donc, je sais que chaque personne va prendre une approche différente face au refus. Donc, c'est important de se connaître et de savoir si vous êtes déterminé ou vous êtes têtu ou borné. Par exemple, on s'attend à ce qu'un repostulant se mette à postuler à autre faculté de droit, parce que cela démontre vraiment le sérieux de cette personne candidate, de vouloir étudier le droit. So, really do think about the message that you're sending by just sort of redoing the same thing over and over and over again, or not applying to another law school, even though you say that you really want to go to law school. And it shows a little bit of maybe stubbornness, and refusal to recognize in yourself that you might be lacking certain core competencies. Another issue that we often see is folks who are discussing only the refusal and not following the general instructions in their personal statements. So a lot of people will focus in on, this last year I was refused and it was so hard for me and this and that. We understand that, and we understand that you might want to share about that, but it's always really important to make sure that your personal statement goes back to those 3 core questions that we want you to be answering. Et enfin, un autre piège qu'on voit très souvent, c'est des gens qui brûlent leur pont avec leur faculté. C'est triste, mais ça arrive. La faculté essaie vraiment d'éviter d'admettre les personnes candidates qui seraient toxiques à notre environnement, à la communauté de professeurs et étudiants aussi. Nous comprenons très bien la nature des étudiants et étudiantes en droit, ou de moins le stéréotype de l'avocat ou l'avocate. C'est vraiment quelqu'un qui aime argumenter, qui aime combattre et qui perçoit ce qu'il soit comme une injustice. Je suis avocate et je comprends ça très, très bien. Cependant, c'est super important que vous compreniez très bien qu'un bon juriste le fait avec respect, intégrité et intelligence. Donc, si quelqu'un agit de façon contraire à tous ces principes, donc respect, intégrité, intelligence, lors du processus de candidature ou à la suite d'un refus, cela peut porter préjudice à une candidature future, car elle aura soulevé un doute quant à son jugement, sa maturité, son leadership et la capacité à travailler avec les autres, qui sont tous des éléments super importants pour les étudiants et étudiantes en droit et pour les futurs juristes aussi. C'est ça. So, some useful tips in terms of building a more competitive application looking forward. One thing that you want to do is, ask yourself, can you redress your lack of academic competitiveness? One way that you might consider doing this is writing the LSAT. So you could consider rewriting it or writing it for the first time, since it will be a new element in your file. You could think about maybe doing a master's degree, if I would say only if you want to acquire that life experience, because it is a bit of an undertaking to do that. As a comparative baseline, we do use your undergraduate performance and your CGPA, which is calculated for reporting and sort of comparing files amongst each other. But the committee is also going to look at each class. So the committee will look at undergraduate performance as more indicative of how you'll perform here, but graduate studies will be assessed as well. And I would say that a full undergraduate, again, I mentioned, is better than 1 year of university. But with regard to graduate studies, so speaking from experience, I believe that the fact that I had done a graduate degree before getting into McGill Law made me that much more competitive, because it does show, certain core competencies that we're looking for in our candidates, like the ability to read, write, and do research, and work with others in many cases. Another point here is if your grades were strong enough to be admitted to a law school in Canada, but you were refused from McGill Law, a good option would be to take that offer at another school and then apply to McGill as a transfer student. At least you'll be getting closer to your goal, which is ultimately to be a lawyer and practice law, or, not necessarily be a lawyer, but get a law degree and use that law degree in an interesting way. Also, if you do really well in another law school, those grades will be given much more weight because they're extremely relevant to predicting your academic success here. So in our pool last year, we had 2 transfer applicants get accepted, get offers of admission to McGill Law after having been refused in previous cycles. I would also stress so much that you check our instructions every year. You really, really, really can't presume that things didn't change since you last applied. So, for instance, this year, there are changes to our personal statement. So in the past, we had a 500-word limit. This year, it's going up to 750 words. So you want to make sure that you are very aware of those changes so that you don't miss those core instructions when you reapply. This year also, there's a slightly different process for application for Indigenous students. So again, read our website, familiarize yourself with the requirements, and make sure that that you're submitting everything you need to. And again, avoid those common pitfalls, be open, lucid, and adaptable, have some self reflection, talk about your application with someone that you trust. Maybe that person can help shed light on some of the things that went wrong and give you a sort of an outsider's perspective. So, what should go in your new application? Your application is held for 3 years at the Faculty of Law. So if you've applied sometime in the last 3 years, your file will still be in our archives. What this means in practice is that the committee is going to have access to it, is going to look at it, and is obviously going to focus its analysis on your new application, but will still be able to go back in time and see what was in your old application. So our committee is going to get a sense of the evolution of your file, and we're going to be looking at the reasons why you refused the last time around to see if you've addressed those. So yeah, that's it. So if it's older than 3 years, all the documents will be shredded or deleted if they're electronic. So you're going to need to submit everything new. So there is a new application process in all cases. There's a new application form that you would need to submit online. You would need to submit a new CV that has to be under or no more than 2 pages. You should submit a new personal statement that should stand alone. You don't want to presume that the committee is going to reread the old one. So you really do need to submit that new personal statement. In terms of your transcripts, you should think back or ask yourself or ask us, were the transcripts that you had submitted to us last time around, were they final? Anything new, any new grades need to be submitted. Also, with regard to the LSAT, do you have any new scores that you need to share with us? LSAT scores older than 5 years we won't have access to. So it's really anything that you've done within the last 5 years. In terms of references, you're only able to submit 2. So it's really up to you to decide whether or not you want to keep the same 2 that you submitted the first time around, or submit new ones. But with regard to references, I would stress that you should strongly consider, if you're applying as a university student, especially, submitting academic references as opposed to personal or professional references. You can substitute an old reference for a new one, but just keep in mind that we have a new form. So if you had applied anytime prior to 2018, you should be aware that we've since implemented a reference form that will need to be submitted. So again, I will stress that you should not presume that the committee is going to be going back and looking at your old file, and that your new application really must stand on its own. And so at this point, I've pretty much covered all that I want to cover from the reapplicant point of view, and I would like to turn things over now to our student ambassador, Alyosha Hurry, who is a successful reapplicant to our program. And so I will turn things over to Alyosha. So Alyosha, if you want to just jump in here and give us your point of view as a reapplicant, that would be great.
Yeah, so hi everyone, I'm Alyosha. I'm a second-year student at the faculty, and honestly, I'm really honored to be speaking at this event because I remember watching the webinar in my room 3 years ago and just furiously taking down all the notes and hoping that I would learn something to make me a stronger applicant. So I'm really grateful to be here to be able to maybe help someone out in the same way. Before law school, I completed a bachelor's in sociology from Bishop's University, which is about 2 hours from Montreal. And before that, I was at Dawson College and I was in the Law Society and Justice profile. Going to law school was something I always knew I wanted to do because I love to read and write, debate and argue. So it just always seemed like the natural career path for me. And somewhere down the line, I had my heart set on McGill and I was very determined to come here. I applied for the first time out of CEGEP, and obviously I was refused. However, looking back, I can honestly say that getting refused the first time around was probably one of the best things that ever happened to me. I was so much more prepared to tackle law school on after having completed a bachelor's, both academically and emotionally. So things kind of have a way of working themselves out. And the good thing I think is that you can learn a lot from the experience of applying the first time. And I think there's an advantage of starting a diploma and knowing exactly what your end goal is and what you have to do to get there. And so I had thought of my old file, and I think I had like no extracurriculars. And so knowing that going to university, I was involved in a bunch of different groups and clubs and initiatives. I made sure that I grew with my organizations and I tried to take on leadership positions. In class, I was always participating. I went to office hours. I made sure that the teachers knew who I was and kind of built a relationship with them so that when it came the time to ask for a reference letter, they could say so much more than just, oh, she's a good student. Because I think that's pretty clear from the transcript. And honestly, the thing I'm going to talk the most about is the personal statement, because watching back, that's what I got the most information on from the webinar. It's been said already in this session, but it's such an important part of the application because it's really your chance to really stand out and show who you are. And so I really recommend writing it very early. I think I spent like 2-3 months just thinking of what I was going to write, writing it, editing it. Have many people read it over and not just your friends and family, because I think I sent my mom like every single draft and she thought they were all fabulous. There was definitely things that each of them could be improved on. I actually really recommend sending them to the professors or the people who'll be writing your reference letters. I sent it to 2 of my professors, and that was good because I got really good feedback, but it also gave them an opportunity to know why I wanted to go to law school, and I feel like that was helpful when they were writing my letters. And one of the most memorable things one of my teachers said to me about my personal statement is that this is the writing sample for the admissions committee. And so she was like, you want to make it so that whoever is reviewing your application reads your personal statement and they're like, wow, look at this caliber of writing. Look how well written this all is. Like, I want to read the student's paper in my class one day. And so I really tried to make something that was not only written well, but interesting to read. And so I know you guys have to answer 3 different questions. Of course, why law, why McGill, and what do you bring to the community? I think the why law question has to come from yourselves. I think that's not something anyone can help you with. But as for the why McGill part, really show that you did your research on the program and spent a good amount of time on the website. I mean, if for you it's the transsystemia, like a bunch of McGill Law profs have written articles on transsystemia. It's a good idea to read them and maybe use that as inspiration in your statement, or if there's a professor you really want to learn from, a class you want to take, or if it's the clerkships and the moots that we offer that really speak to you. Like, I think it's really relevant to be really specific in your letter about why McGill in a way that goes beyond just, oh, it's a great school, it's a great program. And lastly, for the what do you bring aspect, I did a lot of self-reflection on this. I tried to think of what it was in my personal admissions package that made me stand out as a candidate that was maybe stronger than someone else's. And for me, I really think it was the extracurriculars, because I was very involved in undergrad in a bunch of different clubs and initiatives. And so that's what I talked about in my statement. I mentioned that I was very active on campus at Bishop's. You could always see me as part of the club, and I hoped to continue that at McGill. And I even went on the student club section and mentioned a club specifically, which I happen to be working for now as a student. And I know that this probably sounds like a lot to fit in the amount of words you have, although you guys are lucky to have 750. I remember trying to fit everything in 500. But probably the first thing you'll learn in law school is legal writing is all about saying a lot in a very short amount of words, and it's all about being concise. So if anything, it's a really good practice for the upcoming school year, hopefully for most of you. So that's pretty much all I have to say. If you have any further questions, feel free to reach out to me, and I would be very glad to answer.
That's great. Thank you so much, Alyosha. I really appreciate it. A lot of what you said really resonated with me. And it's funny because I did an event yesterday with one of your colleagues who was also saying everyone's so lucky that you have 750 words because 500 was so short. So yeah, no, I think that's all really, really helpful advice. I think really, again, to drive home the point about spending that time in your personal statement. And as a reapplicant, I would say that that's one of the most important places for you to be focusing in your time, because the last thing we want to see is just sort of a recycled personal statement, because I feel like it shows a lack of judgment and a lack of kind of attention to detail and a lack of effort really in trying to improve yourself. So what we'll do now then is I want to open the floor. If anyone has any questions specifically for Alyosha, if you want to get her perspective on anything that she mentioned. Otherwise, we'll turn to the general Q&A portion, and we'll spend as long as we need on that. But hopefully, we'll be able to end somewhere close to 7 p.m. because I know it's a late evening for everybody. So feel free to add any questions that anyone has in the Q&A for Alyosha. Otherwise, Kelly, I'm not sure if you want to feed us any questions that we have received so far in the Q&A from any of the attendees this evening.
Hi, everybody. Yes, we have a few questions that are pretty specific. What is considered to be evidence of French in an application?
Yeah, this is a good question, and it is relevant for reapplicants for sure. I do go over this in quite a significant amount of detail in the general admissions presentation. But so for us, there are a couple of things. So first of all, in the application form itself, there are, I think, 4 boxes where you have to check off whether you have French writing, oral comprehension, reading, and understanding. And so make sure that you check all those boxes off and that you provide an explanation of how you have achieved or obtained a level of French. So that's within the application form. Beyond that, what we want to see is other evidence of French. So it can be through courses that you've taken at university. It can be through activities that you may have been a part of. So in your CV, you might mention that you were, part of a club, or you had a part-time job where you had to use French. You might include that in a languages section at the end of your CV as well. We're also going to ask your referees to provide any commentary they can on your French abilities. And so when you're thinking about who to choose for your referees, you might consider individuals who can attest to your level of French. I recognize that not all of your referees will be able to do that, but just another sort of way to think about choosing your referees. And then if you have taken or if you've undertaken any courses outside of a university context, for example, with Alliance Française, you can always submit to us the proof that you've taken those courses as well, because we'll add that to your file. And so the admissions committee, it's not as if we're just going to go through and we're going to see no French and we're going to refuse you off the bat. We really do go through your file with a fine-tooth comb to see if we can find any evidence anywhere, because sometimes people they'll say no on all of those points on the application, and then we'll look closer and we'll say, oh, well, they have taken French classes, or oh, they grew up in a place, or they went on an exchange to a French institution. So we're not just going to refuse you off the bat, but it really is important for you to take the time to make sure the evidence of that is there. We generally will kind of be a little bit more conservative and give you the benefit of the doubt. And if there is a doubt there, we will follow up with a French test. And it's, oftentimes after that French test that we will get the confirmation that we need, that you just don't have the level of French that you would need for the program, or that you do, or that you might need a bit of work, in which case we would give you an offer of admission that's conditional on you completing additional French. So I hope that answers the question. There's more information about the French requirement on our website, so you can take a look there.
We had another question asking about when to apply. If applying later in the cycle, you'll be more likely to be put on the wait list, or applying earlier in the cycle, will you be put on the wait list? Are you more likely to be put on the wait list?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's an interesting question. So our application has been open since beginning of September, and it closes for folks in the university and mature category on November 1st, with a supporting document deadline of November 8th. We do not start looking at files until after that November 8th deadline. So even if you applied on September 1st, it doesn't mean that your file is going to be reviewed right now, because we do this sort of holistic holistic approach to reviewing files, and we're going to be looking at your file in relation to the rest of the pool. We want to get a sense of what that broader pool looks like first, before we really start getting into looking at the files. So really, it doesn't matter. You're not you're not going to be more likely to be waitlisted if you apply at on November 1st or at 11:59 before the November 1st deadline than if you applied earlier in the cycle. It's just a matter of your file in relation to the rest of the pool.
Someone was asking, what are some ways that past reapplicants have really stood out to you?
Yeah, great question. I think for me, the biggest thing is evidence that the person has really done the work and taken the time to self-reflect, to go back, to think about what maybe the weaknesses in their file were, and really try to address those to the extent that they're able to in their subsequent application. So, we have spoken quite a bit about the personal statement, but a personal statement that really does show a lot of work and a lot of effort in terms of changing it, in terms of tweaking it, in terms of really trying to highlight some of those strengths. Obviously, with regards to grades on a university transcript that are fixed in time, that you can't go back and change, that's something that you can't really focus on. But maybe writing an LSAT, for example. I can remember one file in particular of someone who had really, not done very well in an undergraduate degree, was refused, and then wrote the LSAT, got a great score, and had done a lot of other work on the rest of their file, and then they got an offer of admission. And so again, it's really that sort of evidence of effort, and evidence of sort of self-awareness, I would say, are really important.
Okay, so there's a lot of questions coming in. One question is, if the academic portion was considered a downfall previously, However, all your other elements were positive. Does readmission seem unlikely?
So if academic performance was a downfall recently, I mean, again, you can't really expect that the pool is going to become less strong academically. We have a very, very strong pool of students. I would say do what you can to try and to try and compensate for that. Maybe that's the situation where you think about writing the LSAT. Although I know the LSAT is not the sort of the silver bullet that's gonna fix everyone's fix everyone's woes, because I do recognize that the LSAT is expensive and it's hard and it takes a long time to study and maybe not everyone has the resources. Just a little asterisk here: there are significant opportunities for LSAT prep courses that are free of charge through LSAC as well as through Khan Academy. So if you're thinking about writing the LSAT and you're worried that you might not be able to afford prep classes, there are great prep classes out there. And what I've heard is with the LSAT, practice really does make perfect, or maybe not perfect, but close to. So think about seeking out those resources. But you can always try and reapply, but I think it's really important for you, if your academics weren't or don't seem to sort of lie within the range of the academics that we look for in our program. And you can find the stats that I shared on the slide this evening on our recruitment in our recruitment brochure, which is listed on our website. If you don't fall within that range, you really do want to think about, if you can and if you're comfortable doing so, maybe trying to explain in an extenuating circumstances document why that was the case, if you haven't done that in the past. So yeah, I mean, I would say that the chances that you're going to be admitted are maybe less strong if your academics don't fall within that range. So I don't want to discourage you there. So just try and think about other ways in which you can kind of improve it and prove your academic prowess.
Okay. Someone is asking, does taking the LSAT several times negatively impact your application?
This is a great question. So McGill is a little bit different than some other law schools in Canada who might be looking at your most recent LSAT or your best LSAT. We look at an average of your LSAT scores. So will taking the LSAT multiple times negatively impact? If you're improving your score and your average LSAT score is increasing, and there's an upward trend in your LSAT scores, I think this can provide us with evidence that you do have those academic abilities, or you have the ability to do well on an LSAT, which is a standardized test. So it gives us information. But if you're writing the LSAT multiple times and you're consistently not scoring well, then yes, that is going to reflect poorly in your file, because it's just going to show us that even if you're trying again and you're doing those practice courses, you're still not really able to get your score or to improve your score at all.
Okay. So we have a question about types of personal statements. One specifically is saying, would a personal statement with a story stand out more?
This is an interesting question. So I think it was my first cycle where I remember reading a personal statement that had, I think it was basically framed like a short story. And it actually really worked because this person was a creative writing major. And so that style for them felt really genuine, and they were really able to write well. But at the same time, they were still able to kind of cover those three questions that we keep talking about. So why do you want to go to law school? Why do you want to go to McGill Law School? And what about you should make you an interesting candidate? So I would say that if writing stories isn't your jam and is not what you do on a regular basis, maybe don't do that. But if you feel like you can submit something that feels really true to who you are and genuine and can still answer those three questions, then try it out. But at the same time, maybe ask a friend, maybe ask someone that you trust, maybe your referee to read it and just get a sense. But yeah, the personal statement should be very true to who you are. So don't feel like you have to go out on a limb and be really creative or creative in sort of a creative writing sense if that's not what you're used to doing.
There's a couple of questions about the wait list. How many applicants do we put on the wait list? When do we put them on the wait list? When do we take them off the wait list? Yeah.
Yeah, great question. Yeah, we get this a lot. So I would say that it really depends. So the wait list, the sort of the length of the wait list depends on the year, depends on the pool. And we normally will start waitlisting students around May or June. And depending on how the cycle sort of plays out during the summer months, that's when we'll start refusing people from the waitlist or making offers of admission. So the waitlist is really there is an indication that you are competitive enough to receive an offer of admission to McGill, but there just isn't room in the class right now. So the waitlist is only formed when the class is full and we just don't have space anymore. But because we know that there's sometimes a lot of movement in the class, especially in the last few months before law school, people are getting offers from other institutions. They have other plans happening. That's when those spaces start to open up. Something that I'll mention here that I was actually talking with another student about recently was with regard to the letter of continued interest. If you were waitlisted, you are invited to submit a letter of continued interest in the faculty. And if you don't submit that to us, then that basically tells us, or it gives me the impression that you're not really interested in coming. So I would say that for anyone who has been waitlisted or who is waitlisted in the future, take advantage of that document. It's really important because you're basically continually telling us that you want to come. So yeah, in terms of numbers of people on the wait list, it really varies. There's no ranking on the wait list. Again, it's just people who are potentially admissible to the program, and it really takes shape as the class takes shape. Yeah, and offers of admission from the wait list can happen as close to the beginning of classes as a week. So sometimes we try as hard as we can not to keep people on tenterhooks until that close to the start of classes, but sometimes we will.
We have questions about recommendations for mature applicants. What would we propose, like, would be a good recommendation or a good reference for a mature applicant? If they can't, say, find an academic reference?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for mature applicants, we recognize that, especially if you've been out of school for a number of years, going back to find those academic references is probably not going to be very easy and probably won't be necessarily very representative of where you currently stand, as a student. So I would say in all cases, for everyone, really, use our reference form and the questions that we ask in the reference form as a guide about who you want your reference to be. So for mature applicants, if you've been working for a number of years, and you want to submit professional references, that's totally understandable, but make sure that whoever you choose is going to be able to speak to the different both personal and academic attributes that we will ask them to speak to on the reference form. I was on a law school panel yesterday, and one of my colleagues at another Canadian law school had great advice for anyone seeking reference letters. But you want to choose the most impressive reference and not the most impressive referee. So if you've been working somewhere for a number of years, don't feel like you need to get a reference from the CEO of the company that you've been working with. If you want to get a reference from someone, your direct supervisor or someone who's worked directly with you, who can really speak genuinely about those key core competencies, then that's great. Seeing the designation of CEO next to someone's name isn't going to provide us with that much more confidence about your abilities if that person can't really talk about you meaningfully.
I have another really good question. This one. when should we expect an offer of admission or response on the status of our application from the university? And is this a reflection on the quality or of our application if it's delayed?
This is a great question, like you said, Kelly. So we get last year, that's it, we got close to 1,500 applications, a lot of files for us to be looking at. If you participated in our general admissions session last week, you'll know that we really do spend a lot of time looking through all the files. I mean, I spoke about the holistic admissions approach in this presentation earlier. So we really do go through every file very closely. And that means it takes a long time for us to go through files. So our offers of admission generally start going out sometime. Usually there are some that maybe go out in December, but the vast majority are going to start going out in January, February, March, April. And if you haven't heard back by May, don't despair. It doesn't mean that you're any less strong than anyone else. It's just that it takes us that long to go through all the files. We know that we're slow. We know that we're very slow compared to other schools, but we are sort of aware of other schools' deadlines. And so we're going to try and get through them as quickly as possible. But hearing back later in the cycle is by no means a reflection on the strength of your file. So yeah, that's what I would say about that.
We had a couple of questions about advanced standing. If they were refused as an advanced standing candidate and they reapply, are they more likely to get accepted, or would they get refused again? Would it be the same process applies to all reapplicants?
Yeah, so for those of you, just to provide a bit of context, advanced standing students are those who hold a law degree in another country, another jurisdiction, and are seeking admission to our program on that basis. So advanced standing students are really obviously we're going to be looking at your performance in your law studies. We're going to be considering you in relation to the rest of the pool, but we're also going to be considering you in relation to other advanced standing students. So as an advanced standing student, you're coming in a bit of a different situation than a regular pool. You're going to be getting some credits covered, and you're not going to have to go through the entire degree. And so in some ways, you're not necessarily counted in our first year class the same way that the folks who are applying in the mature or university or CEGEP categories are. We don't have statistics that we can share specifically with advanced standing students, but what I would say about advanced standing students is that we're really going to be going through your law grades with a fine-tooth comb. We're going to be looking through the reasons why you want to come to McGill and spend that time here, getting a law degree in Montreal in Canada. We're going to be looking through your CV to see what sort of experience and life experience and other opportunities you've had working in the field of law, because we are really looking to sort of build our community. So we do look at advanced standing files in a bit of a different light than we would look at a regular university or mature or CEGEP applicant file. Unfortunately, though, I can't share. We don't have statistics. We don't post statistics that we can share about advanced standing students specifically. So I hope that's helpful. I wouldn't say that you're more likely to be refused than another applicant. It's just that it's a bit of a different, we're looking at your file in a bit of a different light based on the fact that you're coming in with already having had done a law degree.
Okay, another question. If obviously, if you're a reapplicant, to what extent should you discuss that you're a reapplicant in your new application?
So this is a great question, and I think goes back to the magical personal statement document. So again, this is a short document. And what I always tell people, so first-time applicants, is don't waste time in your personal statement sharing information about yourself that we can find elsewhere in your file. So if you are a reapplicant, we're going to know that you're a reapplicant because you have to identify yourself as being a reapplicant in your application form. So you don't need to spend a lot of time saying, I was an applicant to McGill Law last year and I got refused. And I mentioned earlier, we don't really want you to dwell on having been refused in your new personal statement. What we really want you to talk about more is, again, those 3 magic questions. So we don't need you to spend the entire personal statement talking about what you've done the last year. What we want you to do is show us through your file. So we'll see that through your CV. We'll see that through any courses you've taken. We'll see that through the way you express yourself. So don't spend a lot of time talking about the fact that you're a reapplicant.
Another question we've been getting is since on Minerva you're able to upload your CV numerous times, different versions. If you upload a couple of different versions of your CV, would that increase your competitiveness?
So we're really going to be looking at well, the committee will look at one version of your CV and focus on that. If you end up submitting subsequent versions of it because you've added new activities, we would welcome and we invite you to do that, because having more information is obviously helpful for us. So I've definitely seen people do that, like if they've gotten a part-time job or if they started volunteering. But the admissions committee is going to look at the most recent one more than anything else.
Question about extenuating circumstances. If you're reapplying and it's the same extenuating circumstance, should that be rewritten or just leave it unchanged? Should they upload it again when they're applying again?
Yeah, and I might turn to you, Kelly, for part of the answer to this question. I think if the extenuating circumstances document remains unchanged in the sense that you don't feel like you need to add anything new to your explanation, then you don't need to. We're going to have access to previous extenuating circumstances documents plus supporting documentation. So I think applicants can just indicate to the admissions office that they just want to use what we have on file. Is that correct?
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you don't need to go through the process of resubmitting everything all over again. And we know that sometimes these documents are quite large. So, in terms of megabytes and stuff, so you don't need to go through that process. But if you want, you can submit something new if you feel like you have new information that you want to share.
Right. And you would still have to indicate on your current application that you did have extenuating circumstances. So we know to go back and look in your file and carry it forward.
Yeah, that's great. That's good information too. Thank you.
Can a current civil law student apply to study law at McGill?
So I'm assuming that this is a person who is studying civil law, maybe at UDM or UQAM or another institution in Quebec, or maybe at University of Ottawa. So they would be applying as a transfer student. And so there's a whole separate application process for transfer students. So I would urge this person who's asking this question to take a look at our instructions for transfer students on our website to get more information about that.
Instructions for writing an extenuating circumstance letter. I know it's pretty general on our website.
Yeah.
But I mean, what kind of information are we really looking for from an applicant?
Yeah, so the extenuating circumstances letter is really there to allow you the space to talk about an element of your file that may be perceived as a weakness, so that you don't have to write about it in your personal statement. We want to give you that space to do it in this document. So really, you have to use it for that reason, right? We want you to kind of explain what happened or what the situation was and how that impacted your academic trajectory. So providing information about, why you may have studied part-time, or you took some time off, or your grades for one semester weren't so great. So, we don't we don't have specific instructions because it's such a case by case situation, right? Everyone's case is going to be very different. People submit extenuating circumstances for a number of different reasons. And so just think about, what is the purpose of this document, and that should help guide you in what you're going to include.
If they didn't want to share their extenuating circumstances on the first application, can they share it on their new application?
Yeah, definitely. They can definitely do so. I recognize that oftentimes the situations that people are sharing with us are very personal. They're very difficult to talk about, and we treat and we handle all of the information that we receive in any element of your file with the utmost confidentiality. But I do really recognize, and I'm sensitive to how hard it is for some folks to talk about these things. And so if in a subsequent application they want to come forward and they want to share that information, it's extremely helpful for us, because in some cases it can really help us understand why they don't have the academics that we might be looking for. And in some cases that can make the difference between an offer of admission and not. So again, all you would need to do is just indicate on your application form that you have extenuating circumstances, and then you'll be prompted to upload documentation to that effect.
There's just one technical question about extenuating circumstances.
Sure.
So they're saying, how do I select it if I didn't put it on my application? All you have to do is email us at the Faculty of Law Admissions and let us know that you wanted to put that on your application, and we will add it to your checklist, and then you can upload the document.
Yeah, that's perfect. We have our email address here on the slide, so it's admissions.law@mcgill.ca. So send our friendly admissions office staff an email, and they'll help you out.
And one more question about, I think I understand what you're asking. Does it reflect negatively if a student shows different interests in the personal statement than shown in the CV, or does not mention anything shown in the CV?
This is a really good question. So again, this goes back to what I was saying before about not using your personal statement to talk about things that we might see elsewhere in your file. And repeating or regurgitating information that's in your CV is a perfect example of this. That being said, and I'm going to use an example that's probably so out there that it doesn't reflect reality. But if, for example, there's a person who in their CV has been involved in and worked in contexts that are all related to corporate law, for example, but then in their personal statement talks all about why they want to do human rights law, there's going to be a major disconnect between those two elements of the file that's going to lead the admissions committee to say, okay, well, what's going on here? Why is this person, are they just saying they want to do human rights because they know that that's something that McGill is really strong in, and so they're just trying to use that document to to pander or to flatter the faculty. So by all means, use the two documents as complementary elements of your application. But you always want to keep in mind that there is the admissions committee is going to be looking for a thread that ties things together. So, make sure that you're not completely on opposite ends of a spectrum in your CV and on your personal statement in terms of what your interests might be. I know that we're just about at 7 here, so I'm not sure how many more questions we have.
There's two questions.
Okay.
About referees.
Okay.
One, the referee didn't want to share their email address, their address, like they're on their application, what can be done. And one of my referees is unresponsive. Can I change that noted in my application? So On the address portion, what a lot of people make the mistake that it's their home address that we want, and it's not. It's the school address that we want, the address of the university or the CEGEP. We do not want their home address. We will not be calling them at home or sending them anything at home. It's the address of the university is what we're looking for. So I understand why they would say, I'm not giving you my home address. People make that mistake quite a few times. And at any time, if you find that one of your referees is being unresponsive, you can absolutely change or substitute a referee before the deadline of November 8th. And well, if you're a university applicant, yes, you can email us again at theadmissions.law@mcgill.ca and let us know which referee you want to substitute and give us their information, and we will update your application. I think that's it. Yep, that's it.
Okay, great. Very efficient. Thanks
Well,
for your help, Kelly.
No problem. There's one more about the letter, the refusal letter, because after a certain time on Minerva, the refusal letter disappears.
Okay.
So again, it's just a technical question. Send us an email and we will be able to send it to you in a PDF.
Okay, that's perfect. Yeah, I didn't realize that Minerva sort of timed out after a certain amount of time.
Yeah.
I suppose they have to keep space open for other things. So, but good to know that we can provide a PDF version.
Okay, we have one more question for you, Andrea.
All right, one more.
One more? Okay. So, as this one was an applicant that was waitlisted last year and then refused, they want to know if they should take the LSAT if there was no indication that the grades were weak or it wasn't competitive.
I would say it's very much sort of a personal decision. If academically this person feels like they sort of fall within the sort of the average range of academic strength within our pool, and if they're not applying to other law schools and they don't need to write the LSAT, then not necessarily the right path. But really make sure to focus on the other elements of the application to just try and bolster those. And I mean, if you were waitlisted, it means that you were very strong. As I mentioned earlier, we saw a very, very high number of folks accept offers way earlier in the cycle, and we really didn't know it was going to happen. So there were many folks who were waitlisted and to whom we weren't able to make offers of admission versus other years who would have maybe received an offer of admission. So yeah, so that's what I would say about that. Okay, I think if that covers all the questions, we're good.
Yep.
Okay, excellent. All right. Well, I want to thank everyone for joining this evening. Merci beaucoup d'être venu ce soir. I wish you all the best of luck in your reapplication efforts, and I wish you all good health. Take care. I know it's a difficult time for everyone, so be well. Merci beaucoup encore et bonne soirée. Merci Alyosha aussi. C'est très apprécié. Take good care, everyone.